Before we dive into this story, I need to warn you, this isn't just a tale of late-night parties and celebrity extravagance. What you're about to hear is my disturbing, bone-chilling account that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about fame, power, and the price some are willing to pay to stay at the top. This story isn't just some urban legend whispered about in dark corners of the internet. But first, subscribe to the channel to follow more scary stories like this one. No, this has been corroborated by none other than Diddy himself. It's not for the faint of heart. The events I'm about to describe are unsettling, disturbing, and, yes, terrifying. If you're not ready to face the sinister underbelly of glitz and glamour, turn back now. But if you dare, stay with me as I recount an experience so surreal and so horrifying, it has haunted me to this very day. So sit back, brace yourself, and prepare to dive into a night like no other. This is the story of the time when to Diddy's one and only red fight. It was 4 a.m., and the Parisian nightclub thrummed with energy. The music was deafening, a pounding bass line that rattled the walls and seemed to reverberate in my chest. The air was thick, partly with the haze of cigarette smoke, partly with the mingling sense of sweat, perfume, and spilled liquor. The crowd, an amorphous wave of bodies, writhed on the dance floor in a way that was less dancing and more primal. From my vantage point in the VIP section, it all seemed surreal. This wasn't just a party. It was an exhibition of excess. Women draped in glittering dresses, or in some cases, not much at all, laughed and posed for pictures with champagne bottles, nearly as tall as they were. Men in tailored suits lounged on leather couches, their expressions a mix of boredom and superiority, as if they were beyond the spectacle unfolding around them. I took another sip of the champagne that had been delivered to my table. It was crisp, bubbling lightly on my tongue, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the excessive price tag that came with such bottles. Or maybe it was the feeling that all this opulence was just a mask for something much darker. "This is what a Diddy party looks like," I muttered under my breath, shaking my head slightly. I'd come to Paris for a story, not to lose myself in this madness. But that's the thing about being around someone like Sean Diddy Combs. He has a way of pulling you into his world, a world where the rules of ordinary people don't seem to apply. Diddy himself sat across the room, positioned in the center of a semicircle of couches, like a king holding court. His girlfriend, Kim Porter, was by his side, radiating calm amidst the chaos. Every so often, he would lean over to whisper something to her, and she would laugh, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Even from here, his aura was magnetic. This was a man who commanded attention effortlessly, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. And as I watched him, I couldn't help but feel that I was witnessing something more than just another celebrity party. There was an edge to this night, a tension that I couldn't quite put into words. "This one's from Diddy." A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a young man, one of Diddy's entourage, placing yet another bottle of champagne on my table. "He said he wants you to enjoy yourself." I raised my glass in thanks, but the gesture felt hollow. I wanted to enjoy myself. Truly I did. But the more I drank, the more I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong here. And that feeling only grew stronger as the night went on. The unease had started hours earlier. During my interview with Diddy, his dressing room at the Bercy Stadium was unlike anything I'd ever seen. More a temple to himself than a place to prepare for a performance. The walls were adorned with enormous portraits of his face, lit by the warm, flickering glow of dozens of candles. The scent of sandalwood hung heavy in the air, almost overpowering. Diddy sat across from me, reclining in a leather chair with an ease that spoke of someone completely in control of their environment. He was dressed immaculately, a black suit that seemed tailored to perfection. In his hand, he swirled a glass of cognac, the liquid catching the candlelight with every movement. "Paris," he began, his voice smooth and measured, "is where people come to lose themselves. There's something in the air here, something magical." I nodded, scribbling notes in my journal. He spoke about his love for the city, how it had become a second home for him and Kim. "We've spent so many nights walking along the sand, just talking and drinking champagne. It's different here. People, they open up in ways they wouldn't anywhere else." But as the conversation continued, his tone began to shift. The charisma was still there, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. "You ever wonder what it takes to stay at the top?" he asked, his gaze locking onto mine. The question caught me off guard. Before I could answer, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's not just about talent, it's about control. Control over your image, over your work, and over others. He paused, swirling the cognac thoughtfully. And sometimes you have to give something up to get there. A chill ran down my spine at his words, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. The way he said it so matter-of-factly, like he was describing a simple business transaction, made it all the more unsettling. Before I could press him further, one of his entourage members entered the room, pulling his attention away. The moment passed, but the weight of his words stayed with me, lingering like the smell of sandalwood, long after I'd left the room. As the party roared on around us, I found myself standing beside Kim Porter. She seemed calm, almost detached, as though the chaos surrounding us were nothing more than background noise. She held a champagne flute, delicately sipping slowly, while the rest of the room dissolved into an unrestrained frenzy. "You don't seem fazed by any of this," I said, gesturing toward the gyrating bodies on the dance floor and the wild, unfiltered debauchery unfolding in every corner. She turned her gaze to me, her dark eyes sharp and unflinching. "Why would I be?" she asked, her voice steady, almost amused. "I don't know," I admitted, struggling to find the right words. "It's just a lot to take in." Kim smiled faintly, the corners of her lips lifting in a way that was neither friendly nor cold. "Just knowing this is nothing," she said, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to music only she could hear. "You should see what happens when the cameras aren't around." Her words sent a ripple of unease through me, but my curiosity won out over caution. "How do you deal with it?" I asked. "With him?" Kim's serene mask faltered, and for a brief moment her expression darkened. She looked away, her gaze distant, as though recalling something she'd rather forget. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, laced with a hint of resignation. "Living this life with Diddy is the most amazing, horrible feeling you will ever experience." I furrowed my brow, unsure of what she meant. She continued, "The highs are unimaginable. Our first night in Paris, we were at the top of the Eiffel Tower drinking champagne, probably the most romantic moment of my life." Her voice grew quieter, and her expression shifted again, this time to something heavier. "Then we went back to his suite for a 30-hour tantric sex session. 30 hours. I checked out in the first 10 minutes. I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or wince. But before I could decide, Kim leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Can I tell you something, off the record?" I nodded, the tension in my chest tightening as I braced myself. Kim glanced around, ensuring no one else could hear, then locked her eyes onto mine. Her voice trembled, barely audible over the pounding music. "Diddy is a demon." I stared at her, frozen in disbelief. My initial instinct was to laugh, to dismiss the statement as hyperbole. But the seriousness in her tone was impossible to ignore. She didn't break eye contact, her words landing like a weight in the pit of my stomach. "You're joking," I managed, though my voice lacked conviction. Kim's lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head slowly. "You'll see for yourself," she murmured, almost to herself. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing alone, her confession echoing in my ears. The grand ballroom was the heart of it all. It was a cavernous space, its high ceilings disappearing into shadow, the flickering glow of hundreds of candles barely illuminating its edges. The faint scent of wax and something metallic hung in the air, mingling with the faint hum of whispered conversations. The light cast strange dancing patterns across the room, and the air itself felt heavy, as though it were saturated with something unseen but palpably oppressive. At the center of the room stood a group of young women in their early 20s. They were dressed in nothing but tank tops and underwear, their pale skin illuminated by the candlelight. Their lips were painted a garish red, the color so vibrant it almost seemed to glow in the dim room. They stood perfectly still, their expressions blank and unseeing, as though they weren't fully present in their own bodies. I couldn't shake the unease that rippled through me. Their stillness was unnatural, not the kind born of fear or nerves, but something deeper, more sinister. It was as though they were marionettes, held in place by invisible strings, waiting for the puppeteer to give them purpose. "What the hell is this?" I whispered to myself. The words barely escaped my lips, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. No one answered. Around me, the guests continued to murmur and sip champagne, as if nothing about the scene in the center of the room was out of the ordinary. Before I could process what I was seeing, Diddy entered the room. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention as easily as if he had snapped his fingers. He moved with a deliberate grace, his tailored suit pristine, his gaze sharp and predatory. It was as though he were a lion stepping into a den of smaller, weaker creatures. His confidence, so absolute, it bordered on arrogance. "Welcome to the Red Party," he announced, his voice low and resonant, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. The room erupted into cheers, the sound incongruously jubilant against the eerie tableau before us. But Diddy's tone sent a chill down my spine. There was something about the way he said it, like it wasn't just a theme for the night, but a declaration of intent. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the young women, their eerie stillness anchoring my gaze even as I wanted to look anywhere else. I'd heard whispers earlier in the night, fragments of conversations about how Diddy liked his parties to be perfect. His obsession with detail wasn't limited to the music, the decor, or the champagne. It extended to the people, to the energy they brought, and to the roles they played. One of the guests standing near me, an older man in a crisp suit, leaned in and whispered, as if he could sense my confusion. "Diddy likes his parties a certain way," he said, his tone both amused and conspiratorial. "It's not just indulgence, it's intention." I frowned, but before I could ask what he meant, he gestured to the young women at the center of the room. "The red lipstick," he continued, his voice hushed but tinged with awe. "It's symbolic red," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is the color of passion, of power, of blood. It's what draws the spirit here, what opens the door." My stomach twisted at his words, but he wasn't finished. "The tank tops and underwear," he added, gesturing slightly, "strip them of identity. It makes them blank slates, pure vessels ready to receive whatever comes through." His words left me cold, but the pieces began to fall into place. The young women weren't just decorations or performers. They were participants in something far darker. The garish lipstick, the minimalist attire, their vacant expressions, all of it served a purpose, intertwining them with the ritual that this night was building toward. Diddy turned his attention back to the crowd, his smile predatory. "The Red Party is more than a name," he said, his tone growing darker. "It's a calling, a celebration of power in its purest form. And tonight, you'll witness the pinnacle of it all." The candles flickered, their flames growing higher for a moment, before settling back into a steady glow. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the room itself were alive and breathing. The young women in the center remained still, but their stillness now felt charged, as though they were conduits for the energy building around them. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing shallow, as I fought the urge to run. Something was coming, something I couldn't explain but could feel with every fiber of my being. The Red Party wasn't just a spectacle, it was a ritual, and whatever it was meant to summon was drawing closer with every passing second. The night was unraveling faster than I could process. The room was thick with an energy I couldn't describe. Oppressive, suffocating, like the walls themselves, were closing in. The flickering candlelight cast shifting shadows across the ballroom, making the space feel alive, as though it had a pulse of its own. The chanting from the guests grew louder, their voices blending into a hypnotic hum that made my head swim. At the center of the room, Diddy stood, his arms raised high, commanding attention like a preacher leading a congregation. His expression was calm, but his eyes glinted with something dark, something inhuman. Then the music shifted. It wasn't the pulsing rhythmic bass line from earlier. This was something else entirely. A haunting, melodic sound filled the room, eerie and distorted, like it was coming from deep underwater. The source of the music wasn't clear at first, but then I saw them. The young women, the ones who had been standing motionless moments before. They were swaying now, their bodies moving in unison, their voices blending into an otherworldly harmony. It wasn't singing. It was something darker, something primal. Diddy stepped into the center of the circle. And that's when it happened. His body started to move. Not the smooth, choreographed gestures of a man who had spent decades in the spotlight, but something entirely different. His limbs jerked and twisted unnaturally, as though he were a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. His head snapped back, and a guttural sound escaped his throat, a sound that wasn't human. The guests around the circle erupted into nervous laughter, clapping and cheering, but their expressions betrayed their fear. They weren't enjoying this. They were participating because they had no choice. I stood frozen, my champagne glass trembling in my hand. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding in front of me. Diddy's movements grew more frantic, his body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It was as though he were being consumed from the inside out, his frame jerking violently, as if something inside him was trying to escape or take over. Then I saw it. Above him, just barely visible in the flickering light, a pair of glowing eyes appeared. They were suspended in the darkness, hovering above Diddy like a predator watching its prey. The eyes were inhuman, large, almond-shaped, and glowing with a fiery intensity that made my chest tighten. They blinked once, slowly, and I swore I saw a twisted grin materialize beneath them, sharp and jagged like broken glass. My stomach churned. This wasn't some elaborate performance. This was something else. Something I didn't have the language to describe. I blinked hard, hoping to break the spell, but when I opened my eyes, the scene had only intensified. Diddy's movements were no longer just erratic, they were violent. His body slammed into the floor, then sprang back up with a force that seemed impossible. The guests continued to clap and cheer, their laughter growing louder, more forced, as if trying to drown out the sound of their own fear. And then he screamed. The sound was deafening, primal, a raw outpouring of agony and rage that pierced through the room like a blade. It was a scream that didn't belong to any human, deep and guttural, layered with tones that shouldn't have existed. The glowing eyes above him widened, and for a moment I thought I saw them flicker. Just a brief, flickering acknowledgement that they were aware of me, watching me. And then Diddy ran. He bolted from the circle, his body slamming into guests as he tore through the room, his scream echoing long after he disappeared from view. The guests parted like waves, their nervous laughter turning into murmurs as they glanced at each other, unsure of what to do next. But no one moved to follow him. They simply stood there, paralyzed, as though waiting for permission to breathe again. The path from the chateau was a blur of jagged breaths and trembling steps. My legs barely held me as I stumbled through the wooded estate, each shadow stretching longer and darker than it should have. The world around me felt wrong, unnatural, as if reality itself had been warped by whatever I'd witnessed. My mind raced, replaying the glowing eyes, the grotesque convulsions, and Diddy's unnatural screams. Was it real? Could any of it have been real? I didn't have an answer. I wasn't even sure I wanted one. As I broke through the tree line and onto the gravel driveway, I collapsed to my knees, my hands scraping against the coarse surface. My lungs heaved, dragging in air that felt too thin, too cold. I didn't notice the figure until it was almost upon me. "Hey," a voice called out, low and steady. I looked up sharply, my pulse spiking, as a towering man stepped out of the shadows. His broad shoulders blocked the fading sunlight, and his face was lined with deep grooves that seemed carved by years of regret. His eyes, however, were soft, almost pitying. Instinctively, I scrambled back, my mind flashing to the circle, the chanting, and the terror I'd left behind. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice lacked conviction. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said calmly, his tone weighted with something I couldn't quite place. "But you need to listen." I froze, my chest heaving as adrenaline warred with exhaustion. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I've worked for him, for Diddy, for years. Long enough to know what just happened in there." He gestured vaguely toward the chateau, his expression darkening. I stared at him, my body still coiled with tension. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "You've been marked," he said grimly. My stomach dropped. "Marked?" I echoed the word, tasting foreign and wrong on my tongue. "What does that even mean?" "It means you've seen too much," he replied. "Once you've been exposed to the Jezebel spirit, there's no undoing it. It's like a parasite. It latches onto fear, regret, weakness. It crawls into your life, your mind, your soul, and it doesn't let go." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. Why would it come after me? I didn't do anything. I didn't ask to be part of this. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he seemed to wrestle with himself. "You don't have to do anything," he said finally. "Just being there, seeing it, that's enough for it to latch on." I shook my head, anger bubbling up beneath the fear. "Then why the hell are you still working for him? If you know what he is, what that thing is, why stay?" His expression hardened and his voice dropped. "Sometimes survival means making deals," he said, each word heavy with regret. "I've done what I had to do. And trust me, this thing, it takes more than it gives." I stared at him, my mind spinning. How do I stop it? How do I make it go away? "You don't," he said bluntly. "You can't, but you can fight it. The spirit feeds on fear. The more you give into it, the stronger it gets. Don't trust what you see. Don't trust what you feel. It'll twist your thoughts, make you doubt yourself, isolate you until there's nothing left. His words were terrifying, but there was something in his tone, an urgency, a quiet desperation that made me believe him. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Stay strong. Don't give in. And remember, you're not the first and you won't be the last. He straightened and turned to leave, his boots crunching against the gravel. Wait, I called after him, my voice hoarse. Your name? What's your name? He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. His lips curled into a faint, knowing smirk. Jean, he said simply, before disappearing into the shadows. I stood there alone, in the quiet of the afternoon, his final words echoing in my mind. Once marked. There's no true escape. The truth is, this isn't just a story. It's a warning. What I witnessed that night wasn't an isolated event, or a drunken party gone too far. It was a glimpse into a machine. A system built on control, manipulation, and submission, operating right in the heart of the industries we idolize. This wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about power. Power bought at the cost of humanity, orchestrated by forces darker than we dare to admit. I'm sharing this with you because the darkness I saw isn't staying confined to that chateau. It's spreading, infecting everything it touches. Our music, our movies, our culture. The truth is being hidden in plain sight. But too many of us are blind to it. If we don't act, these lies will fester. And worse, we'll start to believe them. We'll become them. I can't do this alone. I need you. Yes, you. Watching this to help expose the truth. If what I've shared resonates with you, if it sparks even the faintest doubt or recognition, share this video. Like it, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, anyone who will listen. Spread the word. Because the more people who see this, the harder it becomes for them to bury the truth. And to Diddy, or anyone else caught in this system. If you're listening, know that it's not too late. There's still a way out. But the first step is admitting the lies and the contracts for what they are. A prison disguised as power. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. If we stay silent, we're complicit. If we turn away, we're giving the darkness permission to grow. Don't let the lies win. Don't let them turn you into what they want you to be. The choice is yours. The truth is out there. What are you going to do with it?